I have the honor of introducing the moderator of the panel. I'm very happy to tell some words of moderator, distinguished Chief of Education Unit, UNESCO, Ms. Joyce Pong. She's stationed at the New Delhi office, but she has joined the UNESCO New Delhi cluster office already in November 21 as Chief of the Education Unit, and she manages the organization's priorities and activities in education in Bhutan, India, Maldives, and Sri Lanka. And from 2009 to 2021, Joyce was based at the UNESCO headquarters and worked in the education sector's executive office before joining the Division of Peace Education and Sustainable Development. And she has also worked on the Global Citizenship Education program and thematic areas ranging many themes such as peace and human rights education, reconciliation, prevention of extremism. Joyce was also involved in UNESCO's initiative on education and culture to advance the Sustainable Development Goals, the progress of achieving SDG target 4.7 on quality education, and on the review of teachers' motivation, skills, and readiness to teach global citizenship education and education for sustainable development. So she has been really working in the core of this area where also GINTL is focused. I will now give the floor to Ms. Joyce Pond. We're very happy and grateful for your contribution as a moderator of this panel. Thank you.
Suurkiitokset, Dean Voikas, for your very kind introduction and for opening the event. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining into today's panel discussion on the theme of COVID-19 and education, impact, challenges, and opportunities in preschool and school education in India and Finland. Without much ado, I would like to bring in the esteemed panelists to introduce themselves in the order listed in the agenda. First, Professor Padma Sarangapani. Namaste. How are you? Please take the floor to introduce yourself.
I'm a professor of education at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and I chair a Center for Excellence in Teacher Education there. My areas of research interest are curriculum, teacher education, and indigenous knowledge systems and education.
Thank you very much. Next, Hyvää huomenta, Professor Maria Kristina Lyrkkänen. Please take the floor for your brief introduction.
Hyvää huomenta. So my name is Maria-Kristiina Lerkkanen, and I act as a professor of education and as a vice head of the Department of Teacher Education at the University of Jyväskylä, Finland, and also as a visiting professor at the University of Stavanger, Norway. My research is in the field of educational psychology, mainly concerning reading skills, motivation, primary education, preschool education, teacher training, and how teachers' well-being is affecting to learning and motivation. It's my privilege to be here today.
Kiitos. Professor Emerita Venita Kaul. Namaste, ma'am. How are you? Please take the floor for your introduction.
Namaste to everybody. I'm Venita Kaul. I'm retired from Ambedkar University, Delhi as Professor Emerita, Education. And my areas of interest have always been early childhood education, and I'm very much interested in research. So we recently completed a longitudinal research on early childhood education, and I would share my learnings from that. Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Dhanyavad, madam. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Vesa Valkila, may I ask you to please introduce yourself to the audience?
Thank you very much. So hello, my name is Vesa Valkila and I am the administrative principal in the teacher training school of Turku, which is in the southern western part of Finland. And we are part of the Faculty of Education, we're part of the University of Turku. And my expertise is in leadership and management, but also in teacher training. So I have been working at the University of Turku for many decades already. So it's my great pleasure to be here today with you. Thank you.
Paljon kiitoksia. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move to the main part of today's event, which is the presentation from each of the panelists, to be followed by a brief question and answer portion. At this stage, I would like to invite each panelist to give their 10-minute presentation on the theme. And then I will do my best to politely indicate when your allotted time is coming to an end by signaling at the 9-minute mark. The audience is invited to post questions for the panelists on the virtual platform chat. I will be monitoring and collecting the questions and posing them at the end of the presentations to the panelists. And so, Professor Padma, I would like to hand over the floor for your presentation and to hear more on the report for India on teachers. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you. We recently worked with the UNESCO Regional Office on the research leading to a major report on the state of education with a focus on teachers and teacher education. I'd like to share that with our colleagues from Finland. And I'm going to draw a little bit on that report and a few other reports for today's presentation. My center is a new center at GISS. We are building on over 10 years of work in service teacher education and now also beginning our work in pre-service teacher education with a view to set standards for the sector and to influence and catalyze the practices of teacher education in the country. The next slide, please. Yeah. We are a very huge, large school education system in India. We have over 9.4 million teachers employed in over 1.6 million schools. These numbers must be mind-boggling. This is a federal system, and the schools are actually governed in states. Each state in India would be equivalent to a country in Europe. The system is complex because we have varied kinds of providers of school education, which includes schools run by local government, schools run by the state government, schools run by various societies, aided institutions, as well as privately run and funded institutions. So it's a very varied system of providers, as well as arrangements for delivery of school education. And moreover, the schools cater to and offer education in a multiplicity of languages and cater to various medium of instruction. There are at least 180 languages that can be found across different schools in India. The next slide, please. So I wanted to give you this idea to just indicate to you how diverse the system of education is. And even when we look at a phenomenon like COVID and its impact on the system, these dominant characteristics of the Indian school system, again, are important in understanding varied experiences and ability to respond and overcome challenges posed by the pandemic, for example. Moreover, the school system in India is to a large extent in rural areas, especially over 80% of primary schools are located in rural parts of India, and over 60% of secondary schools are located in rural parts of India. The system also has a very significant proportion of private providers, which has been growing. These are schools that are funded by fee, by and large, and the proportion of fee-paying schools in India is about 35%, employing over 35% of the teachers. This is important because when we think of the impact of COVID on the system and the ability of the system to support its teachers to be resilient in crises, this characteristic of the Indian schooling system has shown itself to be a very important differentiator. Only about 16% of teachers working in private schools report as working with contracts. And this is really an important feature and characteristic. The third feature is that the profession is feminized, but differentially so across different sectors. We find that early childhood education is very, very feminized, with 85% of teachers in early childhood education being women. We find that urban schools are heavily feminized, with about 60% of teachers in urban areas being women. And we find that the private sector is heavily feminized, with close to 75% of teachers in the private sector being women. This is again important because a lot of research has shown that COVID has really impacted work lives of women disproportionately. And we see this playing out in terms of the reports that teachers have given us about how they have dealt with and coped with the impact of COVID in their own professional lives. From these preliminary observations regarding the nature of the Indian education system, which I think are important for us to think about as we go forward, I'd like to draw your attention to some of the important findings we have gathered from recent research. The next slide, please. Yeah. The first is the whole question of vulnerability and ability to cope with stress. This is the impact on the private sector of COVID has been very, very marked. In fact, very early in the pandemic, teachers began to report that they were unable to receive salaries because of the impact of COVID on the entire economy and the inability of parents to actually meet school fee. This led to directly teachers not receiving pay, and to date, a large number of private school teachers have not been able to go back to school. So even though it seems on paper that 35% is in the private sector, it remains to be seen as schools are reopened, how many of those private sector schools actually survive and continue to be significant players in the system. The second is that teachers also reported having to deal with offering education in the pandemic time and experiencing considerable stress in the process. Concerns about overall family safety. We find, for example, that there's very limited health coverage, even amongst teachers in the government schooling sector. Concerns about their own health, concerns about ability to meet and the various kinds of exigencies that COVID has been throwing up, and over 25% also concerned about job stability. So clearly the sector is vulnerable, and vulnerability is uppermost on the mind of many teachers in this country, both dealing with the economic impact of COVID across society, as well as specifically the professional impact of having to deal with and meet the exigencies that the pandemic itself has thrown up. Could we have the next slide, please? Yeah. The digital divide is, of course, something which everybody expects to see in a country like India, and it is very much evident from survey data as well. This is actually data that we gathered in the early stages of the COVID pandemic, and we see that while smartphone access seems to be reasonably high among teachers, access to more robust devices like laptops is actually very limited. Only about 40% of teachers say they have access to working with laptops, and there is a gender divide in this. We find more men as compared to women stating that they have access to laptops. Power cuts continue to be a problem in rural areas, and teachers have had to cope with this, along with unstable access to good internet connection. So clearly the digital divide, which is generally there in society, is something that teachers have directly expressed. More importantly, teachers are very sensitive to and have been very alert to the kinds of digital device deficits that their students have experienced. And in fact, one of the sources of stress in teachers on account of this is the extended work hours. You know, the work hours have just gone up by over 25 to 30%. Teachers are spending 10 to 12 hours a day preparing for classes and delivering them. And the other point is that the work hours have actually extended to very early in the morning or late in the evening, because that's when the children get the smartphone to access any online class. And this has had a direct impact on the entire experience of professional work of teachers. Clearly, for students, even more than for teachers, concerns about access to stable electricity and internet have been very marked. And you can see that really, compared to teachers, the condition of students in terms of the digital divide is far worse, and teachers are aware of this. In fact, towards the end, I would like to share with you some of the remarkable stories of how teachers have responded to this. The next slide, please. So on the question of experiences, I have already spoken to you a little bit about the way teachers have dealt with and experienced the impact of the pandemic, especially as concerns the use of ICT. What we find important, which is also contrary to the popular perception that floats around, is that teachers are not negative about the use of ICT. In fact, many of them feel positive that ICT has a role to play in improving access to education and quality education, but they are concerned that they are not prepared themselves. And they're also concerned that the process of integrating ICT into professional work is time consuming, especially for a beginner. And many teachers reported that they felt they were fighting a battle without the right weapons. I've already referred to you the increase in workload, the extremely long working hours that teachers have experienced. And more than 70% of the teachers reported that they actually learned the ICT skills that they needed on their own. So in terms of ability of formal institutions to provide for ICT training, especially in the pandemic time, it was either limited or not sufficient, or it was not in a form that teachers found useful. But we've seen some remarkable initiative taken by teachers themselves to equip themselves. So a lot of peer support and peer learning has happened in this period. The next slide. What has emerged as really important is professional agency, autonomy, and resourcefulness. Normally, people looking from outside onto the Indian schooling system expect that Indian teachers will be deficit, that they will be passive, that they will be uninterested in their jobs, but we don't find this to be the case at all. Teachers have strong professional identity, they have a strong ethical commitment to deliver education to their students, and teachers report widely their own initiative to be inventive, to bridge the gap. Over 30% of teachers spoke about how they came up with various kinds of offline solutions to reach students and by visiting community and so on. They also report that standardized products that were offered from centralized systems were not very useful. And what was much more useful is when they were able to create more relevant localized content, which was in the language of their students and also meshed in with the lessons that they were delivering more seamlessly. And they looked for tools and resources that could make the classroom interactive. They discovered very early that the ICT in education works only when it is interactive, and that passive watching of videos is actually a waste of everybody's time. And a few who were involved with opportunities to use project-based learning actually transferred this into other areas of the curriculum. I'd like to end with just a few thoughts on what have we learned from this. And this is the second last slide, if you can go to that. What we have learned is that teachers are important. And along with teachers, schools are important. Education is not the transfer of content. And I think many people who were approaching education as a transfer of content into the learner's mind have realized through the COVID experience that this is just not working. And this is not what we expect an educational system to do for its students. So education is more complex, and the institutional space, the physical space of education is very important. I think what has also been realized as important is the value of teachers and teaching. This has really emerged. The complexity and the difficulty of being a teacher, I think, has entered into everybody's home and is in the living room. And initially people were making fun of teachers because their lack of skills was showing up, but very quickly parents realized that this was non-trivial work and not everybody can do it. But also what has emerged is the importance of professional capability and autonomy, which are at the center of any resilient system. And finally, educationally worthwhile engagement can be achieved with ICT only when it promotes communication and interactivity. And when teachers take charge of planning, localizing ICT to their own contexts. I think we have heard this over and over again from teachers in their own words. And it is really reassuring that it completely reaffirms what all of us believe is the heart of any meaningful, robust educational process. Thank you.
You're absolutely right. Teachers are not replaceable at all, and no matter how advanced the technology is. And the idea of a teacher's motivation and enthusiasm to teach and to impart knowledge, to care about their learners and the students is something beyond the call of duty. And so thank you very much for highlighting that once again. And now, Professor Lurkanen, may I please give you the floor for your presentation on teacher stress and remote teaching practices as mechanisms for student outcomes. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very, very much, Mrs. Ponen from UNESCO, and also thank you, Dean Poikkeus, for inviting me to this panel. So, dear participants of the seminar, as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has been a challenge to education around the world and also to the schools. And some countries have survived better than others, and also some schools has found better ways to act during this pandemic than some other schools. And now I'm going to shortly present the experiences the Finnish teachers and principals and students has faced during the pandemic in Finland. I start with this figure which we have found from our previous studies that teachers' well-being, students' well-being and principals' well-being, they interact to each other. So if the teacher has some problems in their well-being, it will affect the students' well-being, and also how the principals are feeling at work, that is affecting the teachers' well-being and vice versa. And teachers' well-being is also connected to teachers' self-efficacy belief. So what they think that how they can handle with the challenging situation and with the challenging students. The well-being issue from our studies, we have found that it will affect the pedagogical quality in the classroom, so the teacher-student interaction in learning situations, and actually that quality will affect the motivation and engagement of the students to the school work and the school tasks. And if the motivation and engagement is high, then of course the learning outcomes are better as well. So based on those findings, we had a project where we were looking at the effect of coronavirus epidemic in education in Finland. So how teacher stress and remote teaching practices are affecting to the learning and well-being of the students. I will present some preliminary results concerning the spring 2020 when there was a lockdown in Finland. So all schools were mainly locked down, and the students were moved to home learning, so the distance learning situation. After that total lockdown, there has been, of course, the quarantine periods during these 2 years, but mainly the Finnish schools has been open after that time. So we interviewed more than 100 teachers and about their well-being during the lockdown, and most of the teachers experienced increased stress and inadequacy concerning their work as a teacher. So the stress was related with the emotional exhaustion during lockdown. So that is very deep feeling about the stress, and also it will affect to your work very strongly, and also how you recover from the work day. The challenges were actually quite the same as the previous speakers said concerning the digital skills, digital devices, challenges concerning the quality of remote teaching, because that was a totally new situation for the teachers. However, teachers' work engagement also in Finland was very high, and the digital skills increased rapidly. Even we are talking a lot in Finland about the teachers' high stress during this corona crisis, we can see the individual differences on that. So even the 1/3 of the teachers, there was just an average level of stress and work engagement. There was some differences. For example, the profile group 2, when the stress level before the corona was in the average level, and during the corona also average level, engagement was very, very low to the work. The profile group 3, the stress level, the teacher stress level was already before the corona quite high, but during the corona it was even more higher. But these teachers' work engagement was also quite high. And in the 4th group, they didn't have any stress before the corona, and during the corona they didn't feel very much stress as well. Even, some of them said that it was the easiest part of my work as a teacher to do that remote teaching, and they like it very much. So that was also one group of teachers. And at the same time, they were very dedicated to their work, and they had lowest emotional exhaustion as well. So there was very big individual differences, even in the average level. The stress was quite high among the teachers. What about the principals' well-being then? Because the principals' well-being are affecting the teachers' well-being in school. It was quite obvious that the principals were responsible about the school's concrete actions and how to organize all the schoolwork the new way. So the stress increased because of the workload was increased dramatically, and the long days, work days was evident there. So quite many of them reported 15 hours working days, also the weekends. And the rapid changes all the time increased the stress, unpredictability, so how long this pandemic will last, for example. That was quite interesting, that they felt that there were unclear instructions from upper administrative level, and that was very stressful to them, because they couldn't be sure what would be the best way to act. They also felt inadequacy. What would help them? They said that clear instructions would help, more resources and support from other principals. So they shared their experiences and their best practices. Then we interviewed also the parents and their experiences. The most challenging was to combine the distance learning for their children and the parents' own work, the distance work also. And is there enough devices at home, enough space for everyone to do their work? And there was really many different kind of challenges. Of course, the most challenging was with the children who need support for their learning and also support for their self-regulation to study at home. Because previously the school day rhythm, the day of the child, and also the self-regulation was sort of taken care at school. Parents, quite many parents actually asked that, are teachers aware of the family situation and challenges at home? There was one parent who said, well, I have 5 children and all of them are in remote work. And I'm also with my husband, so we actually need all the spaces at home to do the work and find the peaceful place to have, for example, the online discussions with the teacher or online work at parents' work. What about students' experiences? We have interviewed the 4th grade students. They are 10 to 11 years old in Finland. And we ask from their experiences in interview that from who you ask help. They said that, well, they organized their school day quite independently. So it was my responsibility to make the rhythm for the day. Most of the students reported that the individual schoolwork and the task from the teacher was the main way to study. Most of them ask help first from the parents, and if parents was not at home, they call to the friends, the classmates, or they ask help from the siblings who were also in the remote teaching. Quite interesting was that rarely they ask help from the teacher. And but most of the students trusted that the teacher knows how they are doing. So they know that teachers will be available if they really need the teacher. Quite interesting was also that there was much less the video sessions with the classroom or with the teacher compared to normal school week. And only 44% had video sessions daily, so every day. And that was quite surprising. How the teacher know how you are doing? Well, I wrote a learning diary, for example, so I suppose the teacher is reading that. And some teachers use WhatsApp messages with the students. However, the personal contacts with the teacher were quite rare, which surprised us. How the students experience about remote teaching or face-to-face, which one they wish in the future? Well, most of them want to go back to school. And the most obvious reason was not about learning, it was they miss their friends. Yeah, the contact with their friends and see their friends, they were really missing them. And after that come that they enjoy school life. Learning is easier at school. School gives rhythm to the day. There was also about the 10% of students who like the distance learning more than the face-to-face learning at school. And their reason were that shorter school days and more free time, I can make my own rhythm for the day, and it's more peaceful and relaxing to study at home. We have just got funding from the Finnish Academy, the Strategic Research Council, which funds the high quality research with great societal relevance and impact. And this kind of research seeks concrete solutions to grant challenges that require multidisciplinary approaches. And they have launched last year the new program, Pandemics. So Pandemics as a challenge for society. And we were lucky to get funding for our consortium together with Jyväskylä, Helsinki and Turku universities, and Jyväskylä is leading this consortium of EduRescue, the Resilient Schools and Education System for next 3 years. Got about 4 million euros to do that. So the aim of the consortium is to create the roadmap together with the stakeholders and policymakers to provide research-based solutions with stakeholders and international partners to strengthen the ability and capacity of Finnish society, particularly education staff and students and their parents, to recover from pandemic and prepare for any further crises. We used Bronfenbrenner's bioecological system theory, so we look at that recover from pandemic from different levels and how these levels are interacting to each other. So we think that we need resilience at different levels and collaboration between the levels of individuals, community of learners, teacher training, principals training, educational law and policy decisions and guidelines, and the resources. And this is, of course, quite interesting time for the research that there is a changes over the time, all the time, and how that is affecting to the education system in Finland. What we think, what does resilience means? So it's the ability to recover from difficult circumstances and crises. Resilient system has ability to self-organize, ability to learn and adapt their actions. And the social resilience means the ability of the society to handle challenges, changes, develop and be able to adapt in the future. If we talk about the individuals, they are also able to adapt, have positive attitude, looking for the future, and they act proactive. So we think that the resilient schools then they are prepared to navigate crises and ensure equity and accessibility, so that every student will have equal access to education, also in the crisis, also during the pandemic. The schools have accessible plans and confident principals, so the principals' well-being are taken care of. There is leadership training concerning the crisis in the educational sector. The schools have equipped teachers, so their well-being are taken care, and their competencies to act, for example, in remote teaching and the hybrid models of teaching as well. The schools have empowered students, their well-being, knowledge, skills and agency, and the schools can adapt quickly to changing situations while continuing to provide students high-quality learning experiences. What we have learned already that the Finnish law is not very flexible, and we need to look at the legal actions again, that are these different kind of solutions possible also in the normal time? So is it possible to use the remote teaching, for example, without a pandemic? And what does that mean to keep the high quality of Finnish education and different ways to educate students? What are the flexible solutions at the schools, and what kind of resources they need to develop the distance education? In that EduRescue, we have work packages, 6 work packages. The second work package is quite interesting because they are focusing on the silent voices. So the silent voices which not have been heard during the pandemic. That means, for example, the deaf children and the children with autism and immigrant families and poor families which do not have any digital devices and so on, and how the children's rights will be taking account when they make the different solutions. The third work package is looking at the teacher training and the teaching modalities. So what kind of competencies we need to add to the teacher training, pre-service and in-service training in the future, and also what kind of legal solutions for Finnish education law is needed to do. The fourth one is focusing on the well-being of teachers and principals and the resilient school community. So it's also looking at the training of the principals, so what kind of competencies are needed in the pre-service and in-service principals education. And the fifth one is focusing on the well-being loss and the learning loss of the students. For example, we have PISA data and other international data sets to be used to find the answers that was there the learning loss, and what can be done, what kind of tools we need to develop to overcome this learning loss in the near future. And also that well-being loss has been followed during the pandemic with quite big data sets concerning the children and parents and teachers and principals every half of a year. So we will know more about that also in the future. Well, the main aim is the building resilient school and education together with the researchers, policymakers and other stakeholders, and also with international partners. So I hope that Finland and India can share the experiences and the best practices, how to cope with pandemic and learn from each other. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor. It's really very interesting to learn that there are shared commonalities between different societies, whether it's India and Finland, and I'm very pleased to learn of the strategies that Finland is developing to exactly build resilient education systems, resilient teachers, resilient students, and parents. Thank you very much. And now I hand the floor over to Professor Call. Please provide us your brief presentation from the lens of early childhood care and development. Professor.
Thank you very much. I don't have a presentation, but I will just talk about it. First of all, very grateful for being invited to participate in this Global Innovation Network meeting, webinar. I think that my colleague, Professor Sarangapani, has already talked about the scale of India, which is in the context of India, which is really marked by scale and diversity. So I think I don't need to get into that, except to say that so far as children are concerned, early childhood care and education in India, unlike in Finland, which we know the schooling starts much later, is for the age group of 3 to 6 years. Actually, early childhood care and education is from birth to 6 years. But preschool education, largely in an institutional format, is from 3 to 6 years. And most children and most states in India actually admit their children into class 1 even earlier, around the age of 5 and 5.5 years. So the children coming into the school system are much younger. In terms of numbers, children below 6 in India are 164 million. And children for preschool education specifically, that is in the 3 to 6 age group, is about 70 million children. So that's a very large number to be catered to. And a large percentage of these are below the poverty, from families which are below poverty line. I'm just giving you some sort of a context in which early childhood care and education is being delivered in India. In terms of provisions, I'm sure you must have heard of the Integrated Child Development Services. It's known as the ICDS, which is a very, very large integrated provision for children. I think perhaps the largest in the world, because it has as many as about 1.4 million early childhood education centers all over India, largely in the rural sector, and has been there since 1975 and has been gradually expanding. So today it is almost universalized across the country. What is very significant about this is because earlier we were talking only about education, and especially when we're looking at the impact of COVID, I think this becomes very important to register that the ICDS provides not only preschool education, but preschool education is one of the 6 services that it provides to children between the age of birth to 6 years. It provides for immunization, supplementary nutrition, health checkups, referral services, nutrition and health education, and preschool education. So if the early childhood education center under the ICDS is known as the Anganwadi. So if this Anganwadi closes, you can imagine what is the impact going to be, because it's not only about learning, but it is about the holistic development of the child. So as Professor Sarangapani said, we have the largest program in the government sector, but we also have a very large, almost equivalent private sector. And the program for preschool education is largely either children go to the Anganwadis or the ICDS centers, or they go to these private preschools, which again can be divided between the affordable sector, that is the low fee charging private schools, and you have the very elite schools. And this is more convenient because there's a wide gradation across, but for convenience one could sort of divide them into 2 large segments. And then you have a few government primary schools which also have pre-primary sections attached to them, but those are very negligible. Coming to the COVID impact, the 2020, I think, has been very significant for India. Not only, one is of course the COVID, which hit the world, but also because of the national education policy that came in, a new national education policy in 2020, which for the first time really gave a lot of importance and priority to early childhood care and education. And based on a lot of empirical evidence, a large percentage of which came from our own longitudinal research that I was talking about, showed that children's learning levels in the primary schools are very significantly correlated with the kind of early childhood education experiences children have had. And children do not come in with enough school readiness capabilities when they come into the school system, and that could be a significant reason for children not learning well in school. And keeping that in mind, the National Education Policy laid a lot of emphasis on early childhood care and education as an important segment, and also enhanced its importance and scope by combining it with the early primary schooling. So making it into a foundational stage of education. So earlier, the schooling system started only from class 1 or grade 1, that is a primary school, but now it is supposed to be the foundational stage, which means from 3 to 8 years, which comes in one segment as the foundational school of education, foundational stage of education. So that to 2020 would have really been very significant in terms of being able to translate that into the school system. But unfortunately, COVID struck also in 2020 and the schools closed down. We had a major lockdown, and so far as, it is said that, now the slogan going around the country is that if there is a COVID or any pandemic, the schools should be the last to close and the first to open, whereas it has been the reverse. And it applies much more to the early childhood education centers, that they should be really the last to close and the first to open, because, as I said, the impact is not only in terms of their learning, the cognitive learning, but also in terms of their holistic development, because a lot of those services that are available to children through the early childhood education centers, especially for children from the poorer segments, is they miss out on. So that is a very severe impact of COVID on children. Unfortunately, in India, for the last 2 years, the early childhood education centers have remained closed. They will remain closed. Even now this week, a few states have started to open up the centers. Till now, they had remained closed. And that has had a very significant impact on the malnutrition levels in the country of children, because they have not been able to get the supplementary nutrition that they were getting. They've not been able to get the health checkups that they were getting. But of course, there have been some kind of efforts made to bringing in alternate services in terms of getting the teachers, the early childhood education teachers, who we call the Anganwadi workers. They're not actually very well-trained teachers, but they are more multi-purpose workers who are actually carrying the dry rations to the families of the children to be able to give them some support. But unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily ensure the children are getting the kind of nutrition that they should be getting. The health services are also impacted. So I think overall, there is a very significant impact on the holistic development of children. And learning, of course, because the learning opportunities are very limited. There has been some attempt at some kind of online distance learning, remote learning. But of course, the digital divide that Professor Sarangapani talked about is very, very acute across systems, and especially at the level of these children from the poorer segments. Even there is this whole issue of screen time, the sedentary screen time for children, for the younger child, which has been a major concern, but because of the COVID has taken over this system completely, so the screen time has taken a backseat now. Nobody's talking about it anymore because there has been no alternative. A major issue when we talk about in early childhood education is when we talk of learning loss. There's a lot of discussion on learning loss, but it takes another form in early childhood education, because one doesn't know, this is a point of debate, whether it should be, we should call it a learning lag or a developmental lag rather than a learning loss. It's not that children have learned something and lost it, but this period of life of a child is the most critical period, we all know. These are the most sensitive years when the children are really, they're just developing the potential to learn many things, especially in terms of their sensory development, their cognitive development, their language development, and most importantly, their socialization. And much of this language and socialization, which is so critical to children's learning and overall development, is very interaction based. And that is something that has really been hit by COVID, because children have been confined to their homes and have not been able to get opportunities for interaction with other children or with other older people or adults. And as a result, it's a matter of great concern. And since there's going to be some research on this, I think there's really need to do this research on what is happening to these children who have missed out on these very sensitive years for socialization, because it's like missing out on the time when the child was just ripe to get into this development. So that is something that is really a matter of concern. And as we see it, when the children are now that the schools are going to are reopening, if you take the context of a child who is coming into grade 1, in our system, the child in grade 1 is coming in at the age of 6 years or 5 or 6 years. So the last 2 years of the child has not been anywhere but at home. The child is completely missed out on the preschool education. And at home, there are very limited opportunities. And so therefore, there is, what kind of a lag will that provide? What kind of a school readiness will the children come with? What kind of role? They have not seen a school. Many children don't even know don't have a concept of a school. There are challenges, like they're saying that the whole issue of, strangers anxiety, or the separation anxiety, as we call it, from parents, away from the families, that has not been resolved, which normally gets resolved in the preschool, and it is going to be carried over into the school system. So they will come in perhaps, it is something to be researched and seen, whether there is a very significant impact of this in the school system, and how we are talking about resilience, how the school system needs to be resilient to this kind of an intake of children who are coming in from these difficult situations. So I think one of the issues that we need to sort of really consider is that what is the impact in terms of not only learning lag, but developmental lag of children as well, particularly in terms of their socio-emotional development and socialization, as well as their language and cognitive development. Then in terms of impact, there are also reports a lot of domestic abuse or child abuse having gone up. There are reports of children being, there being quite a bit of stress because there's been a lot of wage cuts and job losses, and parents have been in difficult situations. And that perhaps possibly has led to overburdening of parents, resulting in a lot of child abuse at home. So there are reports of that as well. Especially with girls, but I think in the case of early childhood, it is, I don't think gender is such a significant issue. There is also efforts to bring in technology in early childhood care and education. A lot of, especially in the ICDS, Integrated Child Development Services, a lot of WhatsApp communications has been attempted through the WhatsApp, through smartphones. But also through the regular web-based platforms. But of course, the digital divide is a major issue, as Professor Sarangapani has already said. And also, there is a very big concern that I personally feel, that how are we translating the curriculum into these kind of worksheets and activity-based, lessons that are being transferred through the online system. Because what is happening is that for all practical purposes, what a child is receiving is one worksheet after another. And it is actually a very reducing the entire holistic early childhood education curriculum into worksheets. So how does that really pan out in terms of really being able to substitute for a good holistic early childhood care and education program? I'm not saying that it does substitute, but to what extent can it substitute? And that might have lessons to understand in terms of how technology and hybrid measures can still continue to be used to reach out to children. Parents have responded apparently very well to the crisis that has been there. And very many attempts have been made to reach out to parents, give them some kind of parenting guidance. as well as get them to do certain activities with children. Parents are generally very aspirational, especially mothers, and have actually made attempts in many cases to sit with the children and do certain things with them. Also, one interesting finding is, I think was mentioned by somebody else also, that parents have learned to appreciate teachers because they have realized that teachers are really doing very valuable work. And but the issue is also how much time do the parents have really to give for the children. So those are some of the limitations as well. But one thing that has really come up as a result of this, and I mean, I'll just conclude by saying in terms of opportunities that are there, one of the major kind of learnings that one sees coming out of this 2 years experience is that I don't think schooling or preschooling can be left to be seen in isolation from the larger context. Because as we say that it takes a village to bring up a child, it takes this partnership to be able to really ensure a holistic and well-balanced well-being and learning for children, because the parents have played a very, very significant role in the last 2 years, and the potential of everything has been realized, along with the fact that a lot of community support is also possible. And therefore, and one of the learnings has been in India, because the federal system and a lot of decision making has been very centralized so far as COVID is concerned. But over time now it has been realized that there is need for much more local decision making in terms of opening and closing of schools, in terms of seeing what is happening, how people can pitch in together, the different stakeholders, to be able to ensure children are able to sustain their educational engagement. So somewhere the whole issue of partnership has become very, very important. And that is something that perhaps needs to be sustained in order to continue to have build in these kind of shock absorbers, but also provide for a more wholesome education. The other is that, especially in early childhood education, the curriculum, which is already even the National Education Policy has recommended a very play-based, holistic, developmentally appropriate curriculum. But in reality, what happens is it's a downward extension of the primary education curriculum, what happens in preschool, in the sense that, it's very academic and focused on the learning of the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. And especially now when children are in this mode of transition back into the school system, it is very important to give them that kind of a developmentally appropriate curriculum, play-based curriculum, which can really give them opportunities to be able to resolve many of their stresses and be able to accommodate and readjust to the school system. And that needs to be really promoted rather than, and especially in India, I think there's a need to promote the more holistic and developmentally appropriate play-based curriculum rather than, again, go back to teachers trying to complete the syllabus, which happens even in the preschools. And explore more effective use of technology, besides, of course, ensuring the infrastructure for technology so as to be able to address the issue of the inequity that is there, but also to see what best ways, because it has the potential certainly, but what best way could it serve the purpose, especially in this area of early childhood education, perhaps by reaching out to the parents. And what would be the best way to be able to reach out on a regular basis so that the parents can complement whatever is happening in the preschool system, which would be to the advantage of the children's holistic development. So I think that is something to be seen. And lastly, I think it has also given a lot of learning regarding the need for more decentralized decision making in terms of all parameters of education, especially early childhood education, by involving the more parents, communities, the panchayat system, we have the local governance system, to be able to ensure that, that decision making is not only about opening or closing of schools, but it is also about what is happening in the schools, and to be able to provide for the well-being of children through more well-equipped and well-supported preschool system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Cowell. Yes, I heard lots of very pertinent words: partnership, contextualization, autonomy, and of course, holistic education, because like you said, everything is connected, everyone is involved, or everyone is affected. So we've got to figure out what it is and how it is that we can recover from this, rebuild, and to make it more resilient. And you mentioned something about the ICTs and tools and practices available. There are some questions already from the chat, and I will definitely bring that up as we finish. Now, Mr. Valkila, may I now invite you to present your perspective on leading schools during this very heavy pandemic. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Just briefly to tell you, I'm coming from the school which has 1,200 students altogether, so from primary to lower and then upper secondary. And every year we train about 300 new teachers. So there's all in all 1,500 people in the building on a normal day in our school, which is in Finland, it's quite a lot. I know then that in India the scale is a little bit different. If I briefly just say a few words about the this time during the pandemic in our school and how we organized this school life, especially in 2020, but also actually at least in our case in city of Turku, most schools were also in remote teaching quite a long period during the spring 21. So we had it so then that the grades 1 to 3, they continued in normal classroom teaching, just using face masks, but otherwise they were in the classroom, and some special needs education students as well. But then all grades from 4 to 9 and then in upper secondary, so years 10 to 12, they were in remote teaching. And in grades 4 to 6, we had iPads that the school were able to provide to students. And then in grades 7 to 9, we provided them with iPads or laptops. And in upper secondary school, every student had a laptop. And then in the school building, for example, how we reorganized this, let's say, daily life here. So every class had its own table in the lunch restaurant. Every class had its own area on the schoolyard, and every class had its own toilets in the corridors. And for example, when they were moving in the building, so staircase B was only to go up, staircase C to go down, and so on. So there was signs all over the building, so which were guiding the students. Okay, and now we can have the next slide, please. How to lead the school effectively during the pandemic? Just because we have only this 10 minutes, so I can't go very much into details. But I would say then that to lead the school in an excellent way, it means then that principal should give a lot of support to teachers to be available, to be present, even if you're in remote teaching, so that there is this feeling that you are present. And if there are any problems or challenges, so you try to solve them as quickly as possible. And your role is there also to motivate, to communicate more than normally, and give encouragement to teachers to create positive atmosphere and so on. In this way, enhance this competence and capacity building among teachers, just like what Professor Padma said earlier about this role of competence and capacity building. Then also in this kind of a crisis situation or special situation, we have to focus on those tasks that are relevant for teaching and learning. So to make sure then that this high quality teaching is going on. For example, what we did in the beginning, we made it clear to all teachers, to students, to parents, that if they have any problems with tools or apps or programs or internet connections and so on, they should contact our technical team or principal so that we try to solve the problem. So the message was then that there is no excuse to, you know, to stay out of this teaching, but whatever the reason, we try to find out a solution. In this way, we made a huge effort on this development and success of the school to make sure that this high level of learning is guaranteed. And at the same time, we try to take good care of this well-being of teachers, because that's the best way to ensure this quality of learning at school. And this was the focus that, or this was the place where we had to focus in the beginning. Then we can take next slide, please. Then we also just we made a let's say small survey, not a real research, but a survey about that what kind of effect this remote teaching had on teachers, but also the students' well-being and learning at school. And I really want to thank Professor Lerkkanen about this excellent presentation about and this research that you have done in Jyväskylä about this effect and the whole meaning of this pandemic to Finnish education. So I'm having here now just one school as an example, and just give some let's say important things about what we found out. So in our school, the most important thing during the spring 2020 was that the teachers feel then that when they have good tools and equipment for remote teaching, that's the most important thing. So that when they know then that they have everything they need to be able to teach remote, that's fine. And then another important thing was then that they felt then that there's a whole totally new importance, totally new meaning of their work. So the content of the work is different, but also the meaning of the work to teachers was different than earlier. And then they found it very important that they get support from their colleagues, from the principal, and another important thing was then that they felt that, well, to some extent we were able to reorganize this teaching also so that there was more flexible working time arrangements, and this helped a lot as well. On the other hand, teachers said that, well, it was unclear line between working time and free time, which was sometimes this time management was a problem as well. On the other hand, then those teachers who wanted to stay at home and teach from home, so they felt that it's great then that you don't have to spend any time on traveling. But of course, those who felt that they don't have so good possibilities to give teaching at school, at home, that they can come to school. Then the next slide, please. Then what kind of support the teachers felt is necessary for their own well-being? Absolutely, the most important thing was the support that they were able to get from their colleagues, and the second thing was then the support that they get from the principal and vice principal. But also they felt then that they need more guidance on time management. And quite many of them mentioned also then this proper working economics and working possibilities at home. So that's why some teachers felt that it's better to come to school because this economics is not best possible at home. Then we can have the next slide, please. So if I try to summarize this, we can say that there are couple of things which really matters here. So first of all, this clear division and organization of duties, or reorganization in this case, so that how effectively distribute leadership. That was one of the things that we talked a lot in our school, so that we wanted teachers to take more responsibility, and we reorganized those duties so that the teachers were more involved So in a way, we created a new action culture, which was based on this idea of common responsibility. And in this way, we try to also help a little bit principals and vice principals and their workload. Then one important thing that the principal should keep in mind is this open interaction and dialogue. So that we communicated much more than normally, both in official way, in unofficial way, in meetings, in Zoom or in Teams or on a phone. We organized virtual coffee breaks and we sent more emails than ever and then collected material to teams and so on. And also we started to do so then that on Friday afternoon we always sent messages to teachers and to other staff how was this week and how we proud or thankful for the effort that teachers were doing and so on. And so that with the help of this extra communication, we tried to create stronger team spirit in the school, even we were remote. So, and of course, with the help of that, we were able to make this positive atmosphere stronger and create this sense of trust and commitment and fellowship. And we encourage teachers to share these good practices somewhere. Some, let's say, were very skillful with these digital solutions and some needed more help, but it was important that they share these good practices with each other and they solve together those challenges that they have and give ideas to each others and communicate, but also that there's a lot of possibilities for unofficial talks as well. So we even had one virtual party in our school in order to develop this feeling of that, okay, we are together even we're remote. So but also, of course, principal has to think about this continuous assessment and development of different operations, and try to remember to give positive feedback. So which words like I would like to thank you all for this and that, and use awards or acknowledgements to all, so that hey, 3 months has gone and we have get excellent results and all our student teachers have been able to do all their practice and so on. So we did it, let's celebrate a bit and so on. So once we delivered vouchers to everyone so that they were able to order pizzas from the cafe in the nearby and so on. So we try to to find out these different ways to say thank you to teachers, and in this way to make sure then that it also affects on their well-being and they feel that they have been heard. So this in this way the goal is to support this good performance in the work duties and to enhance well-being as a result. Because if we are able to make sure then that teachers are doing well at work, it means then that they're doing their job well, their students are feeling better, their students are learning better. So we can say that, okay, in this way you can create student and teacher friendly school, and that will also lead to better results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Valkila. Yes, thanking teachers and being positive. Sometimes we need to be positive even for just the little incremental progress that we make. And sometimes it does feel like you're moving one step forward only to move back 2 steps. But education is a lifelong learning process and we're all trying. Thank you very much for that. I'd like now to open the floor for the question and answer portion. There are very, very interesting questions from the chat. Unfortunately, for the interest of time, I will be quite selective, and unfortunately, I will have to choose only one question for each of the panel members, and then I will ask one question that I'd like to everybody to answer on. And I will start with Professor Padma, and it's about the question of availability and utility of existing and present ICT tools and devices, and especially for the disadvantaged sections of Indian society. How do you see the use of ICTs and its impact, especially since it might exacerbate inequalities in Indian society? Thank you.
I think it's really important that schools may give children access to ICT and develop well-equipped ICT labs. We cannot privatize the costs of acquiring ICT to the home, and the school has a responsibility to make this available to students. I think our imagination now has moved beyond digital literacy, and it is really now looking at how ICT can get integrated into and enhance teaching learning of the broader curriculum. And for that, teacher capacity building is important. In our own work in important field action projects, we have found it actually meaningful and possible to have collaborative work with a single device. So 2-3 children working together with one device, and you design activities which actually require this collaboration as you interact with the device. And it's important for the device to have these kinds of productive capabilities. It cannot be just something through which you passively consume ICT material, but you should be able to produce and create. And I think when we design like that, even with more modest labs, which with 20 terminals and not one terminal for each child, we can still have powerful enhancement of learning quality with ICT. So that's what we find.
Thank you very much. I turn over to Professor Lurkanen. And there was a request from the chat if you could clarify further what Finland is concretely doing to build resilient education systems and build resilient schools. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think it's a very important question. I think that Finland is doing the work in every level. In the ground level, inside the schools, they are doing their best to develop their work and also to be prepared to these kind of circumstances in the future. So the teachers and principals are working at schools a lot, and also the parents are now more open for the collaboration with schools. And because they have seen the value of the teachers and the schools for their children's life and their children's well-being and learning. So I think there is a new opportunity to do a new kind of work with the parents and the schools. In the society level, there is many things ongoing. For example, the National Board of Education, who is responsible about the curriculum of Finland. We are now checking that again and also trying to identify the most important skills in every grade level, which are in the top, and how what kind of curriculum is best for the crisis situations. So what are the very basic skills the students need to learn, even there might be some different kind of circumstances like this pandemic is. So the National Board of Education is doing that. We have also the Teacher Education Forum, and they are dealing with the future issues concerning the teacher training around Finland. So what kind of competencies the teachers need in the future. And they just had the last meeting yesterday where they write down the main issues, how to support the teacher trainers and also teacher training in pre-service and in-service training to be more competent to adapt their actions, and also what kind of competencies are needed in the teacher education. Then, of course, the Ministry of Education has been very active together with the Parliament. So what kind of changes we need for the law, the educational law, that also, for example, the remote teaching and different kind of way to teach and learn are possible also in the future. So the more flexibility for the schools to work in the future are now under evaluation. This kind of change has been done already in an island called Ahvenanmaa, because they have the autonomy, and that is sort of the front line how to do that kind of changes to the law. So I see that in every level in our society we are doing that together, and also the other the organizations who are working with the children and young people and quite many vulnerable groups, for example the immigrant families. They are also try to find the best way to support those groups, and I found this group and this collaboration with different, we call it a third sector in the society, that they do very important work, and how the research and their work can be combined and learn from each other. So I think the whole society is now ready to move that direction, and we put a lot of effort to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, it has actually, this pandemic, given us more impetus to be innovative, creative, to be more willing to engage in partnerships. Like you said, parents are now immensely grateful for teachers, and they understand the dedication and enthusiasm. Thank you very much. And since you've mentioned also the immigrant population, this leads me next to the question for Professor Cowell. Very nicely, actually, it's regarding the more vulnerable and marginalized groups in Indian society. And the question is, what has the Indian government provided in terms of assistance or policy to these affected groups, such as the Dalit population, vis-a-vis the pandemic? Professor, please.
Well, there are, if you see in terms of affirmative action in the system as a whole, the government of India and state governments have provided for, I'm not talking about early childhood education, but the school system as a whole, and not only the school system, but even the entire system in terms of employment, that there are reservations for each of the caste, the more underprivileged and the lower segment of society, lower in terms of the lower strata of society. There has been a system of reservation of positions for admission for schools and even for official positions and for the higher education system. But in terms of early childhood education, as I mentioned, that the integrated child development services are there, which is really in concept of, it's a wonderful program because it provides for all services related to the holistic development of a child. As I said, nutrition, health, community education, preschool education, as well as, all kinds of support. And during the COVID particularly, the government has been making, all state governments at their own level, have been making efforts to be able to provide some kind of dry rations or food grains for the families, so that the children are not deprived of food. But of course, it is not the same as giving them hot cooked meals, which they get in the centers when they're open and they go to them.
Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Valkila, you mentioned about the positive atmosphere and developing well-being among teachers and school administrators, school direction. Are there any positive effects, consequences from COVID? Over to you.
Yes, thank you. It's a good question, and actually there are, I would say, quite many positive things that we should think about. so that we shouldn't see only that it's just a negative thing. No, one of the things that already mentioned here earlier is this digital skills, both among the students, among the teachers, and in our case also with student teachers. Many of them actually did their practice to some extent from as a remote practice. So, but then we can also think about then the other aspects. We are now having a lot of discussion about this sustainable development and how we could on a school level effect on that we are promoting sustainable development. And I think this pandemic also gave a lot of more experience of that type of way of doing things. Like if we think about traveling, for example, having this kind of wonderful webinar with you is a good example of that instead of traveling between Finland and India, we can be together here in a webinar, and at the same time that's a climate-friendly way to do this kind of seminar. And in the same way, we can think about that is it always necessary, for example, here in Finland to go and have meetings in our capital in Helsinki, or would it be better to have it online? And in the same way, when we are teaching the student teachers, we can think about that okay, what are such contents, such topics or lectures that it's better to organize that online instead of having it that in a certain hall or in a certain classroom at the university. And so this kind of let's say responsible approach to this kind of questions, I would say then that this pandemic has learned us also to think in a new way from this perspective. And also to find such a new choices of that how we should do the things. So I think this is one example. But also another thing that has become very also relevant, and also I think it has been emphasized here also then that when we are preparing ourselves for the future, and when we are educating these children and young people for the future. So that has to be research-based work. So when we talk about education, which is based on research work, that's very important. And I think it's emphasized now because of the pandemic. So all this research that is about the effects of this pandemic, so it also includes this idea then that what we can learn about it. Let's look at that. What research and researchers are saying about this. How did we react in this situation? It's quite obvious then that there will be different kinds of crises also in the future. So how to prepare for these new changes in the future, and how to also build up this resilience that has been mentioned by Professor Lerkkanen here. So those are the things then that also are related to this pandemic and what we have learned. And I think then that this research-based approach is becoming even important now because of the pandemic. But also I want to mention one thing which is related to this, to some extent to that what Professor Lerkkanen has said earlier. So principals at school have, together with teachers, they have had a heavy workload. And in the same way, we have to think about that what we have learned about well-being and how we can also support in the best possible way both teachers, both principals at school. If we think about, there has been quite a huge research about principals' workload and well-being in Finland, and it was dramatic. These results that we have seen what this pandemic has caused. So Earlier, about 55% of the principals were motivated, well, I can say enthusiastic about their work. Now it's only 35%, and about 20% of the principals in Finnish schools at the moment, they are in a need of a sick leave, or they are on a sick leave. So if we think about that if principals are doing, if their well-being is on a very low level, what kind of effect it has on the teachers and on the school itself. So it's really dramatic. So from this point of view, we really have to put a lot of effort also in that this workload is not too heavy, because that's the very important way to guarantee then that the quality of teaching stays high. Thank you.
It's true. It's an eye-opening experience, and sometimes actually it's probably the biggest shock that we've all faced, especially for education systems. We're still reeling on the consequences of school closures and school well-being, mental health, all these issues. At least, and again, it's also been reiterated by many of the participants that they want to thank the all panelists for highlighting very important topics and placing emphasis on this now very important issue of how to deal with teacher stress, educators, parents who are also not prepared, who don't have the skills, the facilities to help their children. It's been very, very enriching, and I think we need a part 2, as I was just teasing everybody there in the chat. And so with much pleasure, I hand over back to Dean Poikas. It's been such a pleasure to moderate this panel discussion. I have learned a lot, and I certainly hope that the participants have done so too. Thank you very much. Namaste and hey.
Thank you so much, Joyce, for the moderating and for the panel for extremely important messages. I think that there were so many of them there. There was this understanding of that we need a partnership where resilience is brought to fruition when the parents and teachers, principals, and the students work together, and there's this kind of distributed leadership that we need. But there's also challenges like the digital divide that you talked a lot about. If the resources or the tools are not right for the battle, then there are these sort of consequences, fatigue and loss of well-being and loss of learning. So we have to sort of be mindful about what would be the ways of bringing resilience to the system, which is struggling now with the consequences of pandemic. So I was really excited to sort of have this idea of like this holistic approach where we like to see that the learning of the very young children who are in this critical phase, this sensitive period, that has to be a priority. But then, of course, we continue with the children's skill development all through their schooling. So how do we equip our teachers to be able to provide that collegial partnership? And you mentioned a lot of themes there. One is the organizations that are the third sector. We have been working with some NGOs already with our Indian partners, and we felt that that's an important work that we can do together, because as we have familiarized ourselves with the national policy of India, the educational goals there are really remarkable, and we feel that there's a lot we could do together to understand, like, how do we provide in-service training opportunities for teachers, Anganwadi workers, but also the new bridging of like the pre-primary years, which might be a very important period to sort of help the school preparedness skills to develop. But there are so many areas where there needs to be work to be done, and I'd like to point out that the research basis of that. So we've talked with many Indian partners already, and we've felt that to have these sustainable effects, we have to have research right away, as we are doing in service training or some interventions. We've been talking about leadership training, early childhood education, assessment, pedagogical modules, and all of these need to be sort of developed together to see where we can sort of share some of the best practices. Some of them might not work sort of right away because they have to be localized, they have to be adapted, they have to be sort of culturally adaptive. But there is a dialogue that can be done and will be done. So we are extremely grateful for this webinar, for the distinguished speakers who gave us sort of the first push for sort of looking at the future goals, what should be done, what could be done, and the panel who sort of made it even more concrete and sort of gave us some of the sort of highlighted routes of where we could go together. So this was just a starting point for which we hope will be an international learning community which seeks to foster reciprocal learning of our respective cultures, of our educational values and practices, and generate together solutions for better learning for both countries and communities. Thank you so much for everyone. I think we can close with a very high note that this was a very successful event, and we'll hope to see you in the next webinar. Thank you so much for all of you.